In this video, we're going to be going over Chapter 6, Leadership and Trust, and all the things that go along with it. When you think about what leadership is, there's been all kinds of leadership definitions. Jim Cousins and Barry Posner, who wrote my favorite book on leadership, The Leadership Challenge, said leadership is the art of mobilizing others to want to struggle for shared aspirations. I love that. Menace and Nanis, who wrote a seminal book called Leaders. Managers do the right thing, leaders do the right thing. Let me say that again. Managers do things right, leaders do the right things. Max Dupree, who was the CEO of Herman Miller, a company who makes office furniture, said a leader is one who serves. I love that. He gets into the idea of servant leadership. Ken Blanchard, who wrote The 1 Minute Manager. Leadership is an influence process where you try to help people accomplish goals. You have Abe Zalesnik, Ed Fleischman, John Ivancevich, Bernard Bass, Katz and Kahn. Leadership is the influential increment over and above mechanical compliance with the routine directives of the organization. I have no idea what that means. And then you have that old bald-headed fool, Fergie. A leader is someone who has followers. To me, it's pretty simple. When you think about what leadership is, it's somebody who's choosing to willingly follow. Now, there is a difference between management and leadership. Management has the various 5 functions of management: planning, organizing, staffing, leading, controlling. Leadership is one part of that. And the thing is, I've known people who were managers, good managers, but lousy leaders. And I've known people who were fantastic leaders, not much in the way of managers. One of the things that happens is this idea of role theory. Role theory. We have a tendency to live our lives through a series of roles as if we're actors in plays. And you can predict a person's behavior based on the role that they see themselves in. Many times somebody gets promoted to manager and all of a sudden their behaviors change because they have this idea of what a manager is supposed to do. So you can kind of see what happens as far as how people see themselves. Do they see themselves as managers? Do they see themselves as leaders? Leadership styles are patterns of philosophy, beliefs, and attitudes. And there's all kinds of different leadership styles. Now, when leadership was first starting to be looked at, first starting to be studied, people were looking for the traits that were beneficial to effective leadership. The whole idea behind it was if you could identify the traits that people are supposed to have to be effective leaders, and then find the people who have those traits, okay, they'd be great leaders. What they found was there's really no true traits that were necessary. The studies found that they couldn't identify singular traits that would say this person would be a great leader. What they did find was great leaders have certain things in common: physical energy, above average intelligence, self-confidence, and achievement motivation. They wanted to accomplish something. The thing is, it had to be matched to the situation that the person was in. Once they got away from trait theory, they started to get into the behavioral theory. Now, that really started with Ohio State and Michigan. They were doing some research on that in about the 50s, and they came up with kind of the same stuff at the same time, where they said, okay, there's initiating structure and consideration. One group called it initiating structure and consideration. The other called it traditional model and human relations model. Basically, initiating structure is getting the work done. Okay? Theory X. Basically, we talked about Theory X in one of the previous chapters. Consideration is more of the human relations or caring about people, or Theory Y. A guy by the name of Douglas McGregor came up with the idea of Theory X and Theory Y. He was actually looking at motivation. And it actually applies to this whole idea of leadership. And Theory X with the traditional model, just get people to get the work done. And then Theory Y, caring about people. Then Blake and Mouton, who are actually a married couple, came up with their managerial grid. And basically what they did was they said, okay, Theory X, or the x-axis on a grid. Theory Y, or the y-axis. Theory X, conserved for production. Theory Y, conserved for people. And what they found was, okay, if you didn't care about getting the work done, you didn't care about people, that was impoverished management. If all you cared about was getting the work done, you didn't care about the people, that was produce or perish. If you really cared about the people, but not as much as far as getting the work done, that was considered country club management. And what they were saying in their model was the key was to be a team leader. In other words, you have to care a lot about getting the work done, and you have to care a lot about the people. So they said the best leadership style was being a team leader. Fred Fiedler came up with his contingency theory. Now, basically, he was saying that you take that whole idea of theory X and theory Y, and he called it low and high LPC. LPC stood for least preferred coworker. He had people fill out a survey of some sort, and if they were more of a theory X type of approach, he called that low LPC. More of a theory Y type approach was high LPC. And what he said was, okay, there is a level of performance going from poor to good as far as your leadership performance. And the style that needed to be used was dependent upon three different things. Leader-member relations, which could be good or poor. Task structure, which could be high or low. Task structure means how structured was the task. In other words, highly structured would be something like shooting screws on an assembly line all day long. Low structure would be something that would be much more creative, like being an architect. And then you have position power. In other words, what is the perceived power of the leader? In other words, strong position power to hire and fire, or weak. And he had 8 different situations, 8 different scenarios between leader-member relations, task structure, and position power. And depending upon the situation, you come up here and find the highest where it hits, and that's the style to be used. So if you're in a situation 1, good member relations, high task structure, strong position power, come up here, the style that should be used is theory X, okay, or low LPC. If you're in these middle sections here, the style that should be used is more of that theory Y, high LPC. Out here, more theory X. Now, I disagree with what he's saying here, and the reason is because he was saying your style is fixed. You have a fixed style. It's either X or Y. And what we have to do is we have to put you in the right situation in order for you to be an effective leader. And I disagree with that because I feel people can learn. All right? So that's what Fiedler's contingency theory was about. Vroom and Yetton had this. Now, I think this is garbage, okay? Basically, what they're saying is, all right, depending upon what style you use, you have to go through a series of questions. So what kind of quality requirement is there? Is it high or low? What kind of commitment do people have to have, high or low? And you go through this, and it determines what kind of style to use. An autocratic 1 or 2, a collaborative 1 or 2, that sort of thing. I think this is garbage. And the reason for that is because I know nobody who is going to sit there and say, okay, I have a situation. Now let me go through these questions here, and here's the style I should use. Nobody does that. So nobody's going to be able to use this. Hersey and Blanchard, I think, did a great job. Okay, what they said was, you have to use the style that that person needs for that task at that point in time. They said we as leaders have to be willing and able to use different styles depending upon the situation. And what they did was they talked about a series of readiness. Okay, readiness. Originally, they talked about it as maturity, but nobody liked that term, so they went to readiness. R1, or readiness 1, is unable to do the job, and they're not necessarily willing. In other words, it's somebody who's brand new to the company, brand new to the job. R2 is unable, but they're willing. R3, readiness 3, is able, but they're not necessarily willing. Maybe it's not their most favorite thing to do. R4 is somebody that's able and willing. Now, if you look at the chart here, task behavior, that's the X. Okay, if you go back to Blake and Mouton, there's the X. Supportive behavior, that's the Y. Okay, the caring about people. And what they're saying is, you see this line here? What they're saying is, whatever situation the person is in, you come up here, you hit the line, that's the style to be used. So for example, you have somebody who's in R1. They're unable and unwilling. They're brand new. You come up here, you use a very directive style. Define the task, supervise closely. In this kind of situation, okay, maybe they've been around for a while, they're still learning, but they're really excited about what they're doing. Come up here, you use more of a coaching style. Define the task and roles, get their ideas and suggestions, help them along. R3, you're using more of a supporting style. Follower makes the decision, and what you do is you facilitate it. R4, come up here, just get out of the way. Use a delegating style. Now, I think this makes a lot of sense, and this has been used for quite a while. And the reason is because it's basically saying each person is an individual. You have somebody who is an expert in their job. You just get out of their way. Now you're going to ask them to do something that they've never done before. It may be more of an R1 or R2 for that situation, for that task, for that person. So what they're saying is, if you're going to be an effective leader, you need to be able to use all of these styles and recognize the situation so that you could use the correct style at the right time. Then you get into more of the different types of leadership. Now there's charismatic leadership. A guy by the name of Max Weber, okay? It looks like Weber. He was German, so it was pronounced Weber. He was saying that basically power is legitimized on the basis of their exceptional personal qualities or extraordinary insight and inspires loyalty and obedience from the followers. In other words, the whole idea behind charismatic leadership is you get people who will actually idolize the leader and will follow that leader because of the idolization. Basically, charisma, the word charisma, comes from the Greek word, the gift from God. And you have to be careful about charismatic leaders. And the reason is because there have been a lot of people who were very charismatic, but they were nothing but an empty suit. They couldn't get things done. There's this idea of personalized versus socialized charismatic leader. There's research out there that kind of separates out charismatic leadership between personalized and socialized. Personalized charismatic leader is somebody who wants people to idolize them and follow them because of their personal characteristics. The socialized is very charismatic, but they're wanting people to focus in on the organization. So it's very different. The socialized actually comes across more as a transformational leader, which is transformational versus transactional leadership. A guy by the name of James McGregor Burns came up with this in his research in his books. And basically what we're talking about is making major changes in the attitudes and assumptions of the people and building commitment to the mission and the objectives of the organization. What you're doing is you're transforming the organization by transforming the people and their attitudes and assumptions. This makes a heck of a lot of sense because there are 4 key things that go along with transformational leadership. Inspirational motivation, idealized influence, in other words, that vision that they're working towards. Intellectual stimulation, in other words, what you're doing is you're getting people to really think about things, doing things differently. And then individual consideration, you care about that person. These are the 4 things that go along with transformational leadership. Now, one of my favorite books on leadership, as I mentioned, is The Leadership Challenge. And they go into the idea of transformational leadership. And they say that transformational leaders do 5 key things. They challenge the process, inspire shared vision, enable others to act, model the way, and encourage the heart. And you can see some of that in this idea of inspirational motivation, influence, stimulation, and individual consideration. Servant leadership is another concept that's been coming out, where the whole idea is leaders And managers are ones who are to serve the people that report to them. In other words, they take that organization chart, the triangle, and they turn it upside down. And the reason is because if you're reporting to me, I cannot be successful unless you are. So I have to make sure that you have all of the tools and the knowledge and the abilities and the things that are necessary for you to do the job effectively. I have to serve you. And so that whole idea behind servant leadership is to provide that servant behaviors. In other words, putting followers first and helping them grow and succeed in order to get the performance that's necessary. Some people kind of push back against servant leadership. They're basically saying, how can I as a manager serve somebody else? There seems to be a conflict there. No, if you really think about it, the best leaders are the ones who do help others. There's the idea of authentic leadership. In other words, being real, all right? Being honest with people. And what you're doing there, see, nobody wants to follow a phony. Nobody's going to follow a phony. And being real, being honest, being open as far as what you feel about things and what you're trying to accomplish really does get people to follow you. They may not like some of the things that you're trying to do, but they understand it because they understand where you're coming from, they understand your values and things like this. So a lot of people say, okay, which leadership style is best? All right. Well, in my opinion, there is no one best way. If you look at situational leadership and that whole idea of directing and coaching and supporting and empowering and delegating, to me, it seems like these two approaches here are using more of a transactional leadership approach, this for that. These two approaches here are using more of a transformational approach. And at all times, we want to be real, authentic, and use those servant leadership behaviors so that people can be successful. So to me, there's not one way to go about doing things. I think that you have to be able to take all of these various concepts and be able to utilize them effectively in order to be a good leader. Now, why do people follow? Some key things. Number one, character. Do you have the character where they can trust you? Do you have integrity? Do you do what you say you're going to do? Do you have the wisdom to take people to the next level? Are you a role model for the things that you're looking for? And do you have a vision of the future that excites others? When you think about vision, the way I define it in some of the research I was done, vision is a leader's value-based, inspirational picture of a desired future state. Now, I think the vision has to start with that leader. It needs to be value-based, in other words, true north value. It needs to be an inspirational picture of that future state that has simple, concrete visual language. It's things that people can see in their mind's eye. If I say to you, a tree, you can get a mental image as far as what that tree might look like. Now, one person might see an oak, another one might see a pine, you still get a tree. If I say to you, the best, you don't get a mental image. You don't get a visual picture. And so you have to provide simple, concrete visual language so that people can understand it. That vision needs to focus on just a few key ideas. You don't want some vision statement that is, 10 paragraphs long or something like that. People can't remember it. And it enables others to project themselves and their roles into that desired future situation. They can see themselves living that better future. I found research that was looking at prisoners. Prisoners who were lifers, no possibility of parole. All they focused on was getting through the day. Prisoners who had a release date, even if it was some years out, they were visualizing themselves in that better future outside of the prison. So the key is to be able to see yourself in those roles, in those future situations. Now, how do we build trust? Trust is based on several things. First of all, deterrence, then knowledge, and then identification. Deterrence. In other words, okay, am I going to follow that person there? Do I want to see what it is that they're saying? Knowledge. Do you know what it is that you're doing? And then identification. In other words, people identifying with you, there is going to be a higher level of trust. In order to develop trust, you need to have competence. You need to be able to do what you say you're going to do. You need to have character that people can believe. You need to have integrity, doing what you say you're going to do. Being consistent with your actions and your words. Having loyalty to others. And then being open as far as what you think about things. These are some of the key points from the chapter. If you have questions, please give me a shout.